What would you do if a stranger walked through the door carrying nothing but a hungry baby and a debt he couldn't pay? That's exactly what happened on a freezing autumn evening in Denver, 1888. And what came next would change two lives forever. This is the story of Caleb Whitfield and Eleanor Ashford. The wind was already sharp that evening, the kind that cuts straight through a coat. Caleb Whitfield pushed open the door of Grady's general store with his baby son held tight against his chest and a dented tin of milk in his other hand. His coat was thin. His boots were falling apart. But the way he held that child, careful, protective, like the boy was the last good thing left in his world, said everything about the man he was. Near the back of the store, examining a shelf of tea she didn't need, stood Eleanor Ashford. She was one of the wealthiest women in Colorado, a grand house, silver mines, land stretching toward the mountains. But behind all of it sat a grief no money could touch. Years earlier, she had lost her only son. Ever since, her enormous house had felt more like an empty shell than a home. She noticed Caleb the moment he walked in, not because of his ragged coat, because of how he held that baby. Caleb stepped up to the counter, shame written across his face. Behind it stood Otis Grady, a man who trusted numbers more than people. He didn't even glance up at first. Back again, Otis said flatly. Caleb set the tin down. "I need to return this," he said, his voice worn thin with exhaustion. "You bought that 3 days ago on credit." "I know, but the mine let half its men go yesterday. I was one of them. I can't pay what I owe." Otis let out a short laugh. "This isn't a charity, Whitfield. I took a risk giving you that tin, and now it's dented. I can't sell it for full price." Caleb looked down at his son, then back up. "Please, he needs the milk, but I need money for firewood tonight. If I keep it, he might freeze. If I return it, he goes hungry." Right then, the baby let out a thin, weak cry. Most people in the store looked away. Nobody wants to face poverty head-on. But Eleanor didn't look away. She watched Caleb's hands shake, rough, working hands, holding that baby like glass. "No returns on open goods," Otis snapped, slamming his ledger shut. "Take it and go. Don't come back without real money." Caleb froze, humiliation radiating off him. He reached for the tin with white knuckles. The baby's cry grew louder, more desperate. And something in that sound reached straight into Eleanor's chest, a place that had been silent for 20 years. She remembered her own son's last night and the silence that followed it. She stepped out from behind the shelves. Her dress rustled like a sudden gust of wind, cutting through the tension. "Mr. Grady," she said, and her voice cut clean through the room. Otis froze. His whole posture shifted the instant he recognized her. "Mrs. Ashford, I didn't see you there." She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Caleb. "Put the milk back in his bag." "But ma'am, he can't pay." "I didn't ask about his balance." She reached into her purse and set a gold coin on the counter with a sharp click. "This covers his debt. 6 more tins of milk, 2 sacks of flour, and the warmest blankets you have." The store went completely silent. Only the wood stove crackled. Caleb stared at the coin like it had fallen from the sky. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I don't take handouts." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "This isn't charity," she said. "This is one parent who understands what it means to almost lose everything, helping another parent fighting to keep it. Winter doesn't care about your pride tonight. Your son needs warmth more than you need to owe nobody." Caleb looked down at his crying son, and something in him broke. A tear ran down his cheek. "I have nothing to give you back." "Then keep him safe," Eleanor said. "And when you're on your feet again, help someone with less than you." Eleanor sent her driver, Jonas, to carry Caleb and the baby home. Caleb hesitated. "I live by the rail tracks. That's no place for a carriage like this." Eleanor only smiled. "A carriage is just wood and wheels. It goes wherever it's told." On the ride, the baby finally quieted, lulled by the warmth. Caleb told her about his wife, who had died giving birth out in a mining camp with no doctor close enough to help. He'd come west, chasing gold, and found nothing but hard labor and loss instead. His dream was simple: a small ranch near the mountains, something stable for his son to grow up on. When they reached the shanty town, Eleanor was horrified. Scrap metal walls, gaps you could see daylight through, barefoot children in frozen mud. Caleb thanked her and promised he'd repay her kindness somehow. She told him the only payment she wanted was for him to keep his son warm. But as the carriage pulled away, she looked back and saw him standing alone in that frozen mud, and she knew she couldn't just leave it there. That night, she opened a door in her house that had stayed shut for 20 years. Her son Daniel's old room. His wooden horse still sat on the shelf. His little coat still hung behind the door. She stood there a long moment, she wondering if she was doing this because the baby reminded her of Daniel, or because she wanted to fill the space he'd left behind. But she realized something standing in that room. Loving her son's memory didn't mean shutting the door on every other child who needed her. The next morning, she made a decision that would shake the whole city. She called her lawyer and told him she wanted to reopen the old caretaker's cottage on the north edge of her land and hire someone to work it. Her estate manager pushed back. The gardens had been fine without a groundskeeper for 5 years. "The gardens are cold and dead," she said. "I want someone who knows how to bring things back to life." She sent Jonas back to the shanty town with a letter. When Caleb arrived at her estate, still in his same thin coat, Eleanor met him on the porch. She told him about the cottage, the fireplace, the small garden plot that needed a man's hands, fair pay, milk included. Caleb didn't reach for it right away. "You've already done too much. I won't live here as some charity case." "You won't be," she said. "You'll work for every dollar. And if you fail, I'll let you go like anyone else." For the first time, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. "Take a week," she told him. "Look the place over. If it's not right, walk away owing me nothing." Caleb looked at the massive stone mansion, then at the small cottage tucked in the pines. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "I know what it's like to be alone," she said, "and your son deserves a warm room and a real window to watch the sunrise through." He looked down at his sleeping son, wrapped in warm blankets for the first time in weeks. "I'll work for every dollar," he said, and took the key. Word spread fast. The wealthy widow had taken in a stranger from the slums. People whispered at every tea party in the city. "She's lost her mind. He'll rob her blind." Eleanor heard it all and ignored every bit of it. She started walking to the cottage every afternoon. She brought wooden toys for the baby, books for Caleb. She watched him repair the fence with steady, confident hammer strikes. Watched the color slowly return to his tired face. For the first month, Caleb refused anything beyond his wages. When she left a basket of food, he sent half of it back. When Jonas accidentally overpaid him $1, Caleb walked through the snow to return it. He fixed the fence, cleared the frozen well, brought the dead orchard back to life. All without being asked. One evening, the first real snow of December began falling soft and heavy. Eleanor stayed late at the cottage, and they sat together by the fire. It was a small room compared to her grand halls back home, but it held more warmth than her entire mansion. Caleb handed her a small smooth stone he'd found in the garden, shaped almost perfectly like a heart. "I used to find these for my wife," he said quietly. "I want you to have this one." Her fingers brushed against his rough, calloused hand as she took it. For the first time in years, she felt something alive stir in her chest. That frightened her. She'd loved before. She'd buried a son. She'd locked every soft part of herself away just to survive it. What if he only saw her money? What if she was only using this baby to fill the space her own son had left behind? She closed her fingers around the stone. For the first time in years, she had something to lose again. A few days later, a group of men arrived at her gate. The town council, led by a man named Weston Cole, an old rival of her late husband, Mrs. Ashford. Weston began with a cold, practiced smile. "There are complaints about your new employee." He spoke out at a meeting before he was dismissed. "Some are calling him an agitator. Was he accused of a crime? Nungpu." "Then you've brought me gossip, not evidence." Eleanor stood her ground on the steps. "He's my employee and my guest. He's done nothing but work hard and care for his son." Weston's smile thinned. The boundary line on that cottage was drawn under an old survey. "My lawyers believe it can be challenged. If you insist on sheltering this man, I'll ask the courts to freeze every transfer tied to that land." It was a direct threat to everything she owned. That night, she told Caleb about the visit, trying to hide the fear in her eyes, but he saw it anyway. "I should leave tonight," he said. "I've caused you enough trouble." "No," she said, gripping his hand. "If you leave, they win, and your son ends up back in the cold. I won't let that happen." "What about your money? Your name in this town?" "My money has only ever bought me walls," she said. "I'd rather lose their approval than turn my back on what I know is right. My wealth has never once protected me from being lonely." By morning, she had made her decision. Instead of fighting quietly behind closed doors, she called a public meeting in the town square. Standing on the courthouse steps in front of a cold, curious crowd, with Weston grinning smugly in the front row, Eleanor made her announcement. "I have signed a protected 5-year lease on the North Cottage to Caleb Whitfield," she said, her voice carrying across the square. "If he completes the work agreement and improves the land, he will have the legal right to buy the property for $1. It is already signed and recorded with the county clerk." Caleb hadn't known about that part. His face tightened, not with greed, but with the fear of receiving more than he'd earned. "And," Eleanor continued, "I am putting part of my silver holdings into a new project. A nursery and a school, right here in this city, for the children of the rail workers." The crowd gasped as one. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was real power being handed to the people at the bottom of the ladder. Weston's face turned red. "You can't do that. Those shares are tied to your family name, and they're mine to use as I see fit," Eleanor said. "If you want to challenge it, you can explain in open court why a working man and his infant son threaten you so deeply." She stepped down and walked straight to her carriage, where Caleb was waiting with his son. "Is it done?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's just beginning. The victory came at a price." Invitations stopped arriving. Her name vanished from every guest list in the city. 2 banks pulled funding from her school project. Merchants canceled contracts. Anonymous letters warned her to send Caleb away before she lost everything her husband had built. For several nights, she sat alone in her study with the letters spread before her, wondering if courage and foolishness were separated by only a single step. But every morning, she looked toward the cottage chimney. As long as smoke rose from it, she knew the baby was warm, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. Her mansion began to feel too large and too empty, so she started spending most of her time at the cottage instead. She helped Caleb plant a winter garden. They built a small greenhouse together with their own hands. She learned how to wash clothes by hand, how to calm a crying, teething baby at 2 in the morning. Caleb, in turn, spent his nights carving a vanity table out of solid oak, gathered from the mountainside. More beautiful than anything money could buy in Europe. He wanted to prove he was worthy of what she'd given him. Then came the real test. In late December, one of the worst blizzards Denver had seen in years rolled down from the mountains. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped far below freezing. Snow buried the roads, erased the fence lines, and piled against every building in towering drifts. Eleanor sat alone by her fire, the house groaning under the wind. Terrified for the small cottage on the hill, the walls were thick stone, but the roof was old. Then came frantic pounding at the door. She threw it open and found Caleb standing there, covered in ice, his face gone pale blue, gasping for air too cold to breathe. The roof caved in. He choked out. The snow was too heavy. Where's the baby? Eleanor screamed over the wind. Shuai wrapped him in every blanket we had. I put him in the root cellar. It still holds warmth under the frozen ground. I wedged the milk crate beside him to block the falling beams. But one fell across the opening. I can't move it alone. Without hesitation, Eleanor grabbed her cloak. The staff had already taken shelter downstairs, and there was no time to find anyone else. She and Caleb stepped out into a wall of white. The wind nearly knocked them flat. Caleb pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You'll need it," she protested. "So will you," he said. "I can't lose another person to the cold." They crawled up the ridge on their hands and knees, nearly blind in the snow. When they reached the cottage, the center of the roof had completely collapsed. Snow poured through the broken beams. The trapdoor to the cellar was buried under fallen wood. "Samuel!" Caleb shouted. A faint cry answered from below. Together, they cleared the boards with hands gone numb, until Caleb finally heaved a massive oak beam off with his shoulder, pure desperate strength kicking in. Eleanor reached into the opening, found the blanket, and pulled the baby out. Cold, frightened, but alive. They huddled together in the wreckage while the storm raged around them. Caleb wrapped his arms around both of them, using his own body as a shield against the ice. "We have to get back to the house," he said. "I can't move my legs." Eleanor whispered. "You have to," he said. "Move for him." He tucked the baby under his coat, pulled her arm across his shoulders, and helped her stand. Step by step, they pushed through the storm together. When her legs finally gave out completely, he carried her the rest of the way, stumbling through drifts, falling twice, and getting back up both times. When they burst through the mansion doors, they collapsed onto the rug in the great hall, shaking and spent. Eleanor crawled to the dying fire and stoked it back to life. They lay there together until the sun rose over a world buried in white. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. Eleanor opened her eyes and found Caleb beside the fire, holding his son against his chest, one hand still wrapped around hers. "You stayed," she whispered. He looked at her like the answer had never been a question at all. "So did you?" The following year, Eleanor sold the mansion and moved into a smaller home on the North Ridge. She kept just enough of her silver holdings to fund the school and rebuild the cottage into a proper ranch house. Caleb didn't propose right away. He waited until the orchard bore its first fruit, until he'd completed every part of their original agreement. On the night he signed the deed for the land, he placed that same heart-shaped stone back into her hand. "The first time I gave you this," he said, "I had nothing else to offer. And now," she asked, "now I have a home, a son, and a life I want to share with you." She closed her fingers around the stone. "You had all of that before, Caleb. You just needed someone to help you see it." They were married beneath the young orchard trees, their son asleep in Jonas's arms nearby. She no longer cared what the gossiping socialites thought. She wasn't the wealthy widow anymore. She was just Eleanor, a woman who found her family in the middle of a snowstorm. Caleb became one of the most respected ranchers in Colorado. His hands turned dry, forgotten land into something green and thriving. His son grew up tall and strong, a true child of the frontier. They lived simply, far from the polished halls of high society, and they never again held the title of wealthiest family in the state. But in every way that mattered, they had become the richest family around, rich in warmth, honest work, laughter, and someone waiting for them at the end of every single day. Years later, Samuel walked into that same general store with his own young son. Near the old stove, Eleanor and Caleb sat together, hands resting between them, watching the years pass the way one watches a fire slowly burn low. The boy noticed a dusty, dented tin sitting on a shelf above the counter. "Grandpa, why do they still have that old thing up there?" Caleb smiled. "It started with something being returned," he said. "And it ended up being the start of everything good in our lives." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. On the mantel at home, right beside that same old tin, sat the heart-shaped stone. Loving Caleb hadn't erased the memory of the son she'd lost. It had simply given that memory room to grow into something bigger than grief ever could have been on its own.